We are recording. We're here with Nina Power. How are you doing, Nina?
Oh, I'm good. I'm a little bit tired and my face is a bit bashed up, but I'm all right. I'm good. It's everything as well.
Excellent. Yes. I basically don't know you very well, and so I wanted to introduce myself to you reciprocally in a public way, because I think you, to the extent that I know anything about you, it is through um, these broad social trends of cancellation, witch hunts. People, from what I understand about you, you were kind of it was it there's a lot, so I'm not really familiar with a lot of conservative magazines and traditionalism and things like that. It's just not my sphere. So can you kind of tell me, like, I mean, you've told your story 1,000 times to people. Just, but for me and my audience who might not be familiar with that, kind of where were you coming from? Where were you? And then, without getting too bogged down into the details, kind of what happened, and maybe where are you at this moment?
Okay. Oh well, I'll try and keep it succinct. So I mean, I've been writing online since about 2004. So like, I'm really old. Like, I was in the early blogosphere with Mark Fisher and various people, and I was kind of in the London left, I guess you would say. But like, it was a different kind of left, insofar as it seemed still concerned with things in the real world. And I was very involved in the student movement in the UK, and yeah, I've been writing for a very long time. I mean, I've written hundreds and hundreds of things. I've written some books. I'm not solely someone who's been cancelled. I how to put it? I was a university lecturer for 13 years. I taught in London, various places. I yeah, did a lot of work around protest, the right to protest, and defending people in court support, and looking at the law around policing and protest and so on. And yeah, and then I think maybe around the mid 2000, 2010s, mid 2010s, um, I wasn't really sure where the left was going, and I used the left advisedly, I guess, because I mean, I was friends with lots of people who were Marxist, who were like serious thinkers, who were kind of trying to think about things like, well, labor and capital and class, and but then also people who are more cultural, thinking about whether the culture, how we might kind of address culture, whether we could move on with culture, have a progressive culture that was also kind of open-hearted and open-minded. And then I think something strange happened, at least to my mind, with the kind of arrival of the internet and perhaps its capacity to really tap into kind of very atavistic and very old forms of social behavior, or like anthropological modes of behavior that haven't really gone away, but like are expressed in maybe a slightly different way in the internet age. And so in 2018, I posted something very mild, I thought, about the Labour Party. I was a member of the Labour Party, and about they were suspending women for wanting to discuss proposed changes to the Gender Recognition Act, and I thought that this was really undemocratic to suspend members who wanted to have a political discussion. And and then I got kind of targeted by activists, I guess you might say. And I don't the thing one of the things that's strange about this whole thing is I'm not really sure the extent to which people are genuinely committed to the politics they purport to defend. I think one of the strange things about being a liberal subject in a certain way is the kind of LARPing aspect, like that lots of people are trying to kind of, I don't know, play a role. And there's a sort of sense in which maybe if they overconform to a certain issue, then that they are somehow an authentic character. But that kind of started to become this like purity spiral, like cancellation spiral, also around Me Too, and lots of people were just being kind of denounced. And I was trying to sort of talk about the mechanism, like say like we shouldn't do this. We should talk to one another. We should, like, if we have issues, we should have a conversation. Like we've all done stupid things. We're all capable of harm. Like, I certainly behaved like a twat when I was drinking. Like, do you know what I mean? Like we're all human. That we all make mistakes. We're all fallible. Like, let's not do this online. Let's not create like a permanent record of like denunciation. And I think when we were younger, things like denouncing other people or snitching or kind of complaining too much were like themselves frowned upon, if you see what I mean. Like these were not positive methods or tactics that people would like use. Like you'd be criticized if you started doing that. And then for some reason they suddenly became much more dominant. Like people just overlooked the tactics because they thought, well, okay, if this person's bad news or if they have the wrong politics or this person's decided they're a fascist. And like we used to use fascist as a joke, like when someone was being a bit up themselves, or whatever, we'd call them a fascist. But then suddenly it just sort of didn't really become a joke. And certainly I guess there's been lots of work done on the idea of like pathocracies or ponerology, like when kind of societies go wrong and people with disordered personalities take control. And I think that's become quite easy on the internet. And it's sort of allowed the unleashing of there's these kind of atavistic desires for revenge and so on. So I've been cancelled a lot, and I have a particular group of people. I've almost like been assigned my little group of people who apparently watch everything I do and record everything I say and ask everybody who's ever met me if I've said or done something wrong, who, take everything I've written out of context, and, just like obsessive. I mean, it's almost kind of love. It's like very strange. It's like being kind of, I don't know, it's like they pay more attention to my work than I do or anyone else does. Like even my biggest fan couldn't pay more attention. So it's very, very motivated. It's like very driven, and in a way, like maybe it's good. Like I've given their lives purpose and meaning. People have become friends over their shared love of trying to ruin my life. Isn't there something beautiful about that? And you know, so I think, as a Christian, I have to sort of express my love for everyone, and I don't know, like I do try to understand it. Like it's not great. I mean, to in some ways, like it's not nice to be kind of like calumnied and smeared and like have your jobs kind of taken away from you. And I think, but what it reveals is lots of things. Really, it reveals people's fear. How easy it is to play on people's fear, um, and manipulate people that way. But it's very base, like that's a very low level of like human behavior, but it's very powerful. Uh, anyway, so I was working for Compact. Sorry, I was taking forever to explain this. Yeah, so I moved into writing and editing, and I was in a legal case, ended months ago, almost a year ago now, and we both lost. Like we bought a defamation claim, me and a friend, and the other guy bought a harassment claim, and we both lost. We lost on serious harm, even though he had lied and made lots of untrue claims. Um, we didn't reach the technical level for serious harm. It's very difficult to prove in the internet age because it's not like if you have a newspaper article, you can point to the article and say like this was the thing. Whereas if it's tweets and miasmic things or anonymous stuff or lots of people are involved, it's actually much harder to do. And it does occur to me that we might need to think collectively about social processes for, when somebody's behaving like this in a way, like what do we do? Because it's not good for them either. It's not good for anybody, actually. It sort of destroys the social fabric, and and I'm always very into like dialogue and talking to people and resolving things, and like how can we get beyond this? And most of the time, if you fall out with someone, you just ignore them. You know what I mean? It's just like, walk away. And the judge very much said, like, walk away, and we walked away. And then it was like, no, you're not allowed to walk away. So yeah, the guy took loads of private chats that we disclosed, and where we're joking and making comments and talking as friends do, and then kind of twisted and put out of context all these things, like I joke about being a Nazi because I'm being called a Nazi, right? At the time, because everyone suddenly was calling everyone a Nazi for if they thought that like human beings couldn't change sex or something, that made you a Nazi. Um, and like jokes that I'm joking with my friend about, and then presented as if they're sort of, I don't know, like definitive factual claims about the state of my soul, and um, you know, and it's very weird. And there's this kind of like dominant literalism and humorlessness, and I can never kind of work out whether it's a sort of game or a joke, like whether these people actually believe that I really, am a witch or a Nazi, or whether they're just saying it because they know these words have a sort of power, like black magic. I don't know. What do you think?
It's fascinating. I didn't know you were a Christian. Actually, the first thing I noticed about you is you're wearing an Egyptian ankh.
Yes.
So is that a fashion choice? Does that have meaning for you? How do you reconcile that with your Christianity?
Well, it's kind of a cross. No, well, actually, this is a present from a friend of mine, and I actually lost all my jewelry. Not from the legal case because I'm bankrupt, but just I lost it. And actually, I don't know. I just really really like this necklace. And actually, my necklace is featured in the trial in the case. This guy had taken photographs of every single one of my necklaces from my appearance, like on podcasts and stuff, and then tried to claim that they proved that I was like into the occult or a Satanist or something. I don't know, because he was trying to say that like if you're an esoteric Hitlerian, then you would wear like an African geometrical necklace. I don't know. It made no sense at all. Like it was just completely crazy. But it's very creepy to have all of your like necklaces like scrutinized.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's interesting. So I mean, that kind of gets into my response to your question, which is that I view a lot of this maybe as a parallel conflict to Catholicism and Protestantism, and I'm not sure,
Okay.
if you're an Anglican or what your particular sectarian background is, but there is a so there's kind of a joke in America because our experience of Catholicism historically has been mediated through Italians and Irish,
Mhm.
and there's a joke that when you ask an Irishman to explain Catholicism, he'll say like, Catholicism is this weight on your soul, and it just it's this terrible tragedy of life and the universe. And then you ask like an Italian what Catholicism means, and he's like, "Yeah, you do bad stuff, you go to confession, it's all good." So these are two very different approaches to Catholicism. But I would say broadly, the perception from Protestant regions toward Catholicism is that it's much more that Italian version. You look
Mhm.
at Mardi Gras, for example, and other Catholic traditions. In fact, there's something called the Feast of Fools that was popular in the medieval era, where priests would kind of get up to no good. They might drink a bit too much, or there are these Catholic traditions which are people have described as semi-pagan. Christmas it comes from Germany, and I believe it's basically rooted more in the Catholic German tradition rather than the Protestant one. So there's a lot of elements of Catholicism that are actually quite syncretic and tolerant and kind of unexamined. Like they're not from the Bible. There's an allowance in Catholicism where you say, well, it doesn't say that Jesus was born on December 25th. He was probably born in September or October, but we're just going to celebrate on this day because it just makes sense. Like we're not going to try to make everything orthodox letter of the law. It's just like whatever works for this particular cultural setting, we're going to bend the rules and like fit everything together because that's pro-social. Like there's this pro-social element to Catholicism. Whether that's good or bad, I guess depends on how libertarian you are. But Protestantism says, and especially the Puritans said, no, we need to go back to the Bible. Everything that's not in the Bible, completely rejected. That's idolatry. We are in the Babylonian captivity. That's how the Puritans viewed themselves, as being surrounded by a corrupt church they viewed
Mhm.
as satanic. They thought the Pope was satanic. They thought he was doing black masses, very similar to what conspiracy theorists think elites are doing right now. That psychology was a form of moral panic. It was a sense that there are these evil people, they're doing occult things. We need to have a total break off from these people. We need to denounce them and create a pure culture separate from them. And so, if anyone anywhere, in Puritan New England, if someone skipped church on a Sunday, that was grounds for total expulsion from the community, blackballing. You couldn't excommunication. You couldn't talk to that person. You couldn't fraternize with them. You certainly wouldn't allow your daughter to marry that person. So there was a sense of uh, complete social shaming, social exclusion on these points of orthodoxy that continued to accelerate to the point where actually you look at the Amish or the Anabaptists, and they are descendants of Protestants who were defeated and expelled, essentially, coming from the German peasant revolt. They wanted to, they were, in some senses, leftists. They wanted to overturn the social hierarchy, and they
Mhm.
were, stomped. They were defeated, and a lot of them went to Pennsylvania, and they continue to hold fast to these traditions. And there's millions of little Amish sects. I mean, they constantly are breaking apart over doctrinal issues of, can you use a dishwasher? Can you use a washing machine? Can you use a cell phone? And they
Mhm.
will constantly splinter off and have these disagreements. Of course, none of that is in the Bible, right? But there is this psychology of, we have to adhere to a narrow orthodoxy, and if you step outside that, you're evil. You can actually talk to people who have left the Amish community, and they'll tell you, because I use a dishwasher, my mother won't talk to me, and she thinks I'm going to burn in hell because of that, which
Mhm.
is, laughable, but it's also tragic. It's also very sad. And that's how I would explain what's happening now in the left. It's not to say now when I say that, I'm not saying, for example, that Christianity is wrong because of the Puritans and the Amish.
Mhm.
That I don't think that is an argument that we can make. And again, I wouldn't say that just because this is a issue which is gripped to the left, which I would say is the superficial left, right? You're asking, do these people even believe these things, or are they just trying to score points on a scoreboard? You can ask the same thing about the Amish. Do you really believe you're going to go to hell, or are you just winning points in the Amish game? So I think it's a similar psychology. It's that runaway orthodoxy without deeper credit. I mean, that's why I say, if you're going to be a leftist, you have to go a bit deeper, because what's happening on the surface of the ocean, it's these choppy waves and storms where ships are getting ripped apart. But if you just go, 12 meters down or something, the water is calm, the fish are swimming. There's actually deeper ideas here, which are important, which are real,
Yeah.
that we need to recognize the truth of those, rather than just seeing, again, people who maybe have mental illness, personality defects, whatever, narcissism, whatever's going on the surface. They are taking the most superficial dogmas, doctrines, orthodoxy, and they're using that as a weapon to feel important, to feel like they have all this social capital. And this is a tendency, of different personality types, that they identify what is the social center, what is the ideological center. For the Puritans, it was Christianity and the Bible. And so they said, we're going to be closer to that center than anyone else, and therefore more morally good than anybody else. And that, there's a kind of high that comes out of that. There's a kind of euphoria that comes out of feeling that I'm morally better than everyone else. That's not new with the Puritans. I would say that Judaism itself is a product of this process. When you read the prophets, okay, the prophets weren't just saying we're better than the Canaanites and the Jebusites and the Moabites, the Amalekites. They were saying, I am the only man in the whole of the nation of Israel who stands with God, and the entire nation is corrupt, and you're all evil except for me, and you all need to listen to me and get right with God. That is the foundation of Judaism. And the Puritans, in going back to the Old Testament prophets, I think were filled with that spirit.
Mm.
Whereas the Catholics kind of, a lot of them were illiterate and they didn't really take it seriously for a long time. But it's a complicated picture spanning millennia. I mean, the Pope Gregory, who instituted the Gregorian reforms, he ended clerical marriage, which is a difference between the
Mhm.
Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox. He really went hard, and we had the investiture contest where the king of Germany was. Had supported an anti-pope because he said these reforms are too harsh, they're too fast, they're too quick. I mean, you are basically he was saying the left has gone insane and we just need to like stick to tradition and do things that way. So again, there's so many different areas of history that we can look at and say this same tension between on some level hyper excessive dogmatic orthodoxy and people who are kind of just like, well, let's just be practical, pro-social, whatever works. You see that occur again and again and again throughout history,
Mm.
at least for the last 4,000 years. Um, maybe further and so on. So there's some kind of internal tension, I think, within the human mind of just go along to get along and can't we all just be friends and let bygones be bygones, which is an element of Christianity, forgiveness, turn
Mm.
the other
Yeah.
cheek, golden rule. But then there's also this tendency within that Abrahamic tradition of no, you have to cut people off. You cannot marry. So the Samaritans are cut off from God. They are dogs. I mean, that's part of the New Testament as well. So it's a complicated thing, and I think to me it really does get to the heart of the left versus right on that deeper level. There's so many ways to view that dynamic, but yeah, it's certainly it's a painful process. I mean, there is a form of emotional and psychological violence that is occurring, and there is a kind of frenzy that people engage in, like jackals around, a wounded lion or something, where they feel this Dionysian orgy of oh, I can smell blood, and so I'm just going to viciously attack. And the worst, by the way, is the left. I was at a bar, which is, I mean, I won't say it's a gay bar, but I won't implicate myself. But I'll say there was a lot of lesbians, there's a lot of people of color, whatever. It's liberal left bar, whatever. And so somebody had said, oh, you went there? Well, that's scandalous because, there was this thing that happened there. I was like, what? It was like, well, someone made a comment to an Asian person and they were offended. I said, what's the comment? Oh, well, I don't even remember what the comment was, but I just know we don't go there anymore. We're not allowed to go there. And I'm like, there's like this working class redneck bar down the street that probably a lot worse things are said there on a daily basis about women, people of color, whatever, the Trump supporters. Why don't you obsess about them? Why don't you attack them? And it's
Mm.
just shrug of the shoulders, right? It's like, oh, I don't know, like, that does not compute. And so the fact, I think, that you even had this journey where you kind of came from the left, maybe you defected, there's that kind of war between TERFs and trans affirming feminists and that kind of split. It's like the left is more vicious, the kind of intra group violence versus
Mhm.
there's some people we can just dismiss them as being on the right and not even worry about them because they're
Yeah.
outside of our orbit. So that's a general overview of how I would view these issues.
No, I mean, I don't disagree. It's interesting to point to these tendencies. Yeah, and to my mind, like when I think of like the old left, people were forgiving and open-hearted and open-minded. Like it was more flexible. It was much more like people would say things like you have to meet people where they are, right? So if you were talking to someone and they made some like racist comment or whatever, you'd like, or they'd say like people are coming here and stealing our jobs, then it was your job to like give them a better explanation, right? Like to say, no, this is about global capital and the bosses are pitting you against one another. And do you know what I mean? It wasn't to say you're a racist, I'm not going to talk to you, right? It was to give people a better explanation for the material reality that they found themselves in. It wasn't to dismiss people in this way. And it was to like build alliances and to actually um have a sense of humor. And frankly, like in the 90s, like the way of dealing with difference, which I think is much more beautiful, was to sort of almost like make everything mockable, right? Like everything and everyone was mockable gently, right? Whether it was like men or women or different races or religions or whatever. Like so there was nobody who could say you can't joke about me. You know what I mean? And that was actually like it's kind of a solution. It's a sort of social solution to the like the obvious potential antagonism that exists right everywhere, and it diffuses it, in my opinion, right? Like it's a way of, you know, it's a sort of release, like rather than having this, as you put it, like the Dionysian bloodlust, where you tear someone limb for limb because it's been determined that they've got the black mark on them, and you're allowed to do it to them, you know. Like there's a much gentler way of doing this, which is like you know, sort of joking with people, or like in a more gentle, everyday way, and not kind of getting offended, not thinking that like being slightly offended is the worst thing in the entire world and that person needs to die and lose their job, and you know their children should starve for the next 7 generations, you know, I mean. So like I think certainly I think that if you're perceived to be a traitor or a heretic, whatever, and I think a lot of this is like narcissism of small differences, really. It's like, because I was also like an academic and I was writing for the Guardian and stuff, and I think there's a little bit of, oh, well, why is she doing that? Like, I want to do that, you know, like, who is she to have this role or this job? And, you know, and now she's got these horrible opinions. Well, you know, we're allowed to hate her because we've decided that she hates other people, you know. So it's like you're allowed to hate someone who's a hater, right? Even though you're trying to desperately to make rational arguments and appeal to, you know, reality and history and science and whatever. And people are like, no, you just hate. And you're like, I don't hate. Like, I don't think I hate any more than anyone else does. Like, I think I probably have a normal amount of, of hatred and love, but you know, but it's very hard. I mean, I did try and speak to people. I tried to arrange like meetings with people and like have a public meetings, and but people won't talk to you. And I think the technology, yeah, it just allows people to kind of talk about you, but not to you, you know? It's like gossip, but like in the permanent record. Like,
Yeah, Marshall McLuhan actually has a quote. I mean, he has a quote about everything, but one of this is he says, you know, we're assembling this global village, and that term that I think
yeah.
he is credited with inventing, people took that as a very positive thing, like, oh, village, it's nice, it's fun, we love villages, it's cute, you know, it's homely, we're all gonna feel at home. But you know, he wasn't saying that in the uncritical way that the word eventually came to be used, or the phrase. But he actually, you know, acknowledged that in assembling a global village, you're also going to get global gossip. You're also going to get global shaming and global, you know, global, you know, Amish, you know, in a sense of
Mm,
people who have the technology to, you know, be petty and to be uh, not nepotistic in like a genetic sense, but to be very pedantic in how they associate with others. And so there's
yeah.
this phenomenon of, I actually think when we say global village and we say internet ghetto, we're referring to the same phenomenon of people just further drilling down into the specificity of a particular tribal affiliation. I really want to write this article. I've been unable to do it. Just it's in my head, but I haven't yet like had I haven't yet gotten to that flow state where I can put pen to paper. Well, not pen to paper, but start typing on a blank sheet and say, okay, I'm going to get through this topic. But the germ of the idea is the word shibboleth,
Hmm.
and what that meant, and also relating to the blood of Passover. So
Mm,
there's this conception, and I don't have the biblical quotes, but there's a conception that the Passover blood, which the Israelites put on their doors to protect them, was a form of shibboleth, right? Shibboleth is you pronounce, it actually was within the Israelites. It wasn't saying we're going to distinguish Israelites from non-Israelites. It's the
mm,
tribe of Ephraim can't pronounce this word correctly, because actually, I have theory that back in the day, the 12 tribes actually were 12 distinct nations of people, but that were, bound into a single nation kind of as a confederacy. But, so that the term shibboleth already refers to a kind of intra-group violence. Oh, you're an Israelite, but, you're on the tribe of Ephraim, so you're not pure enough, so we're going to exclude you. And then the blood of Passover, the idea there is that God is not able to have the common sense to just say, oh, we're gonna kill the Egyptians and not the Israelites. No, there is this sign, there is this symbol that you need to put up, like the BLM flag or the the black square or the the trans flag or whatever. You need to show the sign and you need to show the signal. And if you don't show that sign and signal, that's evidence. The absence of a positive is a negative. So it's not just saying that, Nina, you've said some bad thing, you've said some wrong things, and so we're going to persecute you. It's saying if you don't positively say, I use she, her pronouns and the whole thing, then that absence of the positive condemns you to death. So that idea there, it's a very old idea. And I think that the reason why, when you say, oh, in the 90s, people could joke, look back at Bill Maher and Camille Paglia and these people in the 90s where, you could have fun. And it was the stodgy conservatives on the right who weren't, they weren't allowed to make jokes. Why has this flipped? And I think the explanation is that people who feel that they are in power, people who feel that they control the status quo, they become fearful of losing their dominance. And so they're constantly looking to identify threats to that dominance and eliminate that. But when you're an underdog, when you feel like you don't hold the center of power, then you're sympathetic to chaos, you're sympathetic to humor, you're sympathetic to frivolity and, kind of ambiguity and, oh, we want free speech and we're going to make some jokes. And, there's a strategic ambiguity that benefits people who are out of power. Whereas if you're in power, you want to eliminate ambiguity and you want conformity and you want certainty. What do you truly believe in your heart of hearts? And so the strategy is you persecute people who are ambiguous and you force them to pick a side. You're either going to put up the flag and say the pronouns and all of that, or you're completely outside and you're banished to outer darkness. And that's what benefits people who are in power. And so the explanation is that in the 90s, certain right-wing norms like evangelical Christianity, Thatcherism, Reaganism, those were still strong. I mean, in America, 1992, I think if you take Ross Perot as socially conservative and you look at Bush, I mean, conservatives easily won, 60% of the electorate. I mean, it would have been a crushing victory. It's just, there was a third-party revolt that allowed Clinton to win. But he won, 42% of the electorate. So the left was actually fairly weak in the 1990s. And it wasn't until, again, the 2010s where you had 2 terms of Obama and the Republicans had been totally discredited with the Iraq War. And you had this, and I was part of the new atheist movement. And I was, with Richard Dawkins and I was with Christopher Hitchens, not physically, but in spirit, and I was like, I watched with my own eyes what seemed to be like the collapse, almost, in the way that the World Trade Centers just one day just suddenly collapsed. It seemed that Christianity was just in free fall. And this thing was I thought that within my lifetime, people would just, God would die and we wouldn't worry and we move on to science. So I think that the perception of who had cultural hegemony changed. And I don't think that, we have a narrow perception of history. So, this has never happened before. But it happened with civil rights. It happened with race. I mean, there was a period in American history where people were openly self-described white supremacists back in the 1920s. But by the 1930s, that was no longer politically correct. By the 1940s, that became illegal. And people like Father Coughlin and Charles Lindbergh were voluntarily or involuntarily silenced. And then by the 1950s, we had Supreme Court rulings on it, and it was enforced at gunpoint. And by the 60s, It was entrenched within law by Congress, and you can look at every decade and you can see how white supremacy, which was once a culturally hegemonic belief, a positive belief that people really genuinely held, became degraded over time to the point where the opposite became true, where racist became a slur or an attack that people sought to avoid. People like William F. Buckley said we need to purge the racists from the Republican or conservative movement. And people like Revelo P. Oliver, who helped found National Review, actually were pushed. And so that purging that we associate with this transition from the 1990s to the 2010s, that did occur on the issue of race. And I think if we neglect to see history in this broad, deep way, then these things seem surprising or unprecedented. But I think
Yeah,
if we
yeah,
broaden things a little bit,
sure.
then they start to become more understandable.
Yeah, and I don't disagree. And I mean, I think it's not really a surprise that people have been looking at Rene Girard a lot in the internet age, for example, right? Like, I think it's very, very obvious because he tries to get to like the things hidden since the foundation of the world, right? So basically, this question of envy and the problem of social tension and the fact that we are mimetic and that we are very, very moved by the desire of people around us, and we want what they want, and how do we distinguish between good desires and desires that seem to come from outside, and that, and feelings like envy are absolutely terrible. Like, people don't want to admit them, they're so unpleasant, like, and if you've ever experienced sexual jealousy, for example, like, you'll know how horrible that feeling is. So people pretend it's about something else because it's like absolutely unbearable. No one wants to sort of admit it. And I think it's interesting, the internet age, like those, yeah, like, of course these things never gone away, of course these things are real. We're still basically, the reason why we can read a poem from 2000 years ago and understand it is because we're basically fundamentally the same kind of people, right? It's like people are talking about their heartbreak or their grief, and it's like, well, yes, I understand this, right? So of course we're not so very different from who we've always been, and so all of that accumulated wisdom, it would be a complete mistake to abandon these these things. And I was just reading about this, the scapegoat, like the actual scapegoat in Leviticus today, right, where they literally put all of the sins of the Israelis on the head of the goat and send it out into the wilderness, right? And we don't have those kind of mechanisms, so you end up with precisely, and especially it's a bizarre one because the virtual scapegoating, it's like the person doesn't go away. Like, it's not like I've gone away. Like, they haven't like murdered me or sent me, like, I'm still online. Like, okay, I was like, I left Twitter, I left, whatever. But it's like, it doesn't really work. Like, you can't expiate the sort of horror and pain you feel on someone else, the sadism. It's not really effective, I think, because the scapegoat doesn't go into the wilderness. Like, I'm not banished. Like, I'm not banned from the internet yet, or whatever. Like, I'm not in prison. I'm not dead. Like, or, and I'm using me and interchangeably with other people in this situation, right? Like, so I'm not trying to sort of make it too personal, but it's like, I'm saying it's like this function, this mechanism isn't pure enough. It's like, okay, we shut down this art gallery we didn't like, but it never satisfies people. Like, they never seem happy with the cancellation. They have to keep doing it, and certainly, like, in 2018, I definitely got a few warnings. Like, you're right. Like, there was the shibboleth thing. It was kind of like, Nina, like, um aren't really going along with this, and like, we're basically going to give you like a couple of chances, like basically one more chance, and if you kind of pledge allegiance to this stuff, we'll leave you alone. But if you don't, we're going to fuck you up. And so that was like, yeah, definitely. It was like, you must bend the knee. You must, show the flag. You must put the pronouns in your bio or whatever. And I was like, no, I'm not going to. It never works. Like, threatening people is not, it doesn't, if you want people to change their minds, you have to reason with them, and you're a rationalist, or, you're in that sphere. Wasn't the great idea that we could reason people into better positions?
Well, To some extent, it works, but obviously, does it work at changing people's minds? I mean, I actually think it does. I actually think people engage in motivated reasoning, and I mean, you're one of the people who for whom it doesn't work because I think you probably have different personality traits than the average person. I think you're when someone says like, "We're gonna do bad things to you if you don't say X, Y, and Z," and you're like, okay, well, I don't care. Like, I'm an independent thinker, I'm fearless, or whatever, versus the average person. I think there are a tremendous amount of people who say, yeah, I don't want to lose my job. I
Sure.
don't, I don't want to be harassed. And so I will just kind of say whatever is necessary. I mean, I found myself I think everybody's found themselves in some sort of position, with the exception of, public intellectuals. I haven't always been blogging or something. So yeah, there have been occasions where I thought, it's probably best I don't say this particular thing or don't contest this thing. I'll just kind of let it slide. And I think a lot of people, the vast majority of people, that's how they deal. That's how they cope with disagreement. And yeah, there's studies on this. And then I think once people do that, there's then two types of people. There's one type of people who say, I have a disagreement. I'm not going to voice it, but I maintain my disagreement. I'm hiding it. I'm
Mm.
keeping it. I'm preserving it. But there's another type of person, and this is difficult to study and ascertain because people engage in a lot of self-deception and motivated reasoning, where they will change their position and they will conform internally. They will actually change their mind. And so
Mm.
we'd like to think that people are rational, and that if you're convinced by a position and then someone threatens you, rationally, that shouldn't change your position. But I think actually for a huge number of people, that does change their internal position. They do begin to believe the thing that they are supposed to believe,
Mhm.
which is, yeah, it seems crazy, but I mean, I try in my own little way to be as rational as I'm capable of being. But I also acknowledge I guess I'm a prescriptive rationalist, not a descriptive rationalist. I don't believe that people actually are, in the majority, rational creatures.
Mhm.
And so I want to be forgiving toward people. But
Yeah.
yeah, I guess I'm not. I think there's that. I hear that a lot on the right of, well, you shut us down and threaten us and censor us, and that's not gonna work because we won't back down. It's like that's true for a certain percentage of people, but it's actually not true for the majority of
Yeah.
people.
But I think for some people it's very difficult to live in cognitive dissonance or untruth, like, or to try to hold two contradictory ideas. I mean, a lot of people speak to me privately because they know that, well, I don't know, it's funny if you're like, if you've been ostracized or you're an outsider, people feel like they can confess to you for some bizarre reason. But I think it probably makes sense. But that people will say things like, yeah, I'm two different people now. Like, I'm one person at work and another person at home, and I can't make jokes at work and I can't and I just think like, oh, how can you live like that? Like, that's horrible. Like, splitting yourself, like disguising your character, or trying to be someone you're not, or like constantly self-censoring. And I'm not like completely naive. I am slightly naive, but I of course everybody filters what they say. It's not like everybody is this pure parrhesia like truth speaking machine constantly, although I do know some people for whom not telling the truth is extremely difficult, like people who are very I guess autistic, you would say, who can't play the game properly, like they just can't, not, I don't know how to put it, they can't contain themselves almost, actually, like they can't read social cues in a certain way to know when it is appropriate or not to say a certain thing or not, right? And I think some people struggle with lying, you know like it's hard for some people to lie. And that's good. We don't like lying, surely. Like, we're against lying. Like, and I don't know, like, it just, I think so. There's such a sort of high degree of like awkwardness, and people are so worried about upsetting people, but then that actually like upsets people more. Like, if you're too afraid to confront someone and say, like, I disagree with that you on this, let's have a conversation, or you know, your drug taking is out of control, you need to get some help, or whatever. Like, there's ways of being kind that are quite harsh. Do you know what I mean? It's not all just going along with whatever someone wants because desire is good. Like, no, that can't be right. Like, we do make judgments constantly. And I think it's just become sort of weirdly easier just for people to ghost each other or to just like pretend there was no relation. And that's really sad. And I don't know, that seems like really antisocial. Like, it might be like as if convenience is the most important thing in the world and that someone's individual smooth life is, that's what a beautiful life is. But I don't think that's true. I think a beautiful life is full of risk and disagreement and dynamism and antagonism and, yeah, and ambiguity and all those things, right? It's not smooth.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess the majority of people by their actions disagree with you, and I understand what you're saying about. I mean, I wouldn't like I don't have the most smooth, just on a personal level. Yeah, that those personality traits, like I am disagreeable. I am like I don't. I'm not easily blackmailed emotionally into changing my mind. And so I sympathize with people with those personality traits, but I also acknowledge that I'm not normal, and the vast majority of people, they want a smooth life, they want stability, they want to go along to get along. They don't think too deeply about these things, even if they think passionately about them. Even someone who says, well, I'm a social worker because I'm committed to human rights, and I say, where do human rights come from? And they say, well, the United Nations. And they're like, okay, well, how long has that been around, and where did that come from? I don't know. Do you think it's a religious place? I don't know. I mean, and so it's like you've dedicated your life to something that you've never thought deeply about, and it
Mm,
astounds me because I can't do that. I can't live life that way.
mm.
But most people can, and most people do.
But isn't it kind of counterproductive even in the medium term to go along with things that you don't agree with? Because ultimately, like, surely people can think ahead to some extent, and it's not just about immediate comfort. It's also like thinking, oh, hang on, like this institution seems to be increasingly run by deranged authoritarians with narcissistic personality disorder. Like, oh, actually, this probably isn't going to go well for me in the medium term. I guess can't people think like that? Like, oh, this is becoming increasingly restrictive, and at some point it's going to be me next. I don't know, or
Yeah, I mean,
maybe not.
I think that it depends on what you're talking about. I mean,
Mm,
certainly. So, I when I talk with people who are maybe further to the right and talk about race, and they'll say, well, we've got this anti-white problem, and eventually it's going to lead to genocide, and that kind of thinking. Um, I'm skeptical of that as well. I mean, I understand, and we could take any issue. We could take economic regulation is out of control and someday it'll lead to communism. Or, we could say that on the left, oftentimes the idea is, the environment's out of control and
mm,
someday this planet will be uninhabitable. It'll just
mm,
be a
mhm,
barren rock because if we take this current trend and we expand it outward, this is the inevitable result. And I call that taking things to their logical conclusion. Now, logic is not factual conclusion, right? So empirically, um, you're taking a trend and taking it to its logical conclusion doesn't actually give you like a real insight into what is probable. But you're kind of just
mm, mm.
you're asking, what if this trend continued indefinitely
Yeah.
with no end? And so people who like I guess I'm sympathetic to people who do that. But I also think there's another aspect to reality where as things occur, as the state of our politics and culture changes, there are also countervailing forces. I mean, like within the body, within a biological system, as a population grows, then it changes its relationship to the environment such that food is less abundant, and then this is a downward pressure. So I think that there are some kind of self-regulatory mechanisms in the long term that become activated and keep in and push things toward the center and keep things from getting too crazy. And people probably maybe they don't ration maybe they can't explain everything I've just explained, but I think they can understand and intuit it. Yes, maybe things feel a little bit crazy right now, like, people talk about civil war. Oh, we're going to have a civil war. and
Mhm.
and and that's actually an attractive thing in terms of catharsis, like you talked about with scapegoating. Like, insulting someone online doesn't ever bring emotional resolution. It doesn't ever bring harmony. And so something like a civil war, as much as I repudiate it, and
Yeah.
nobody wants a civil war, but on some level, like, if there was a civil war between left and right and somebody won and the other side was just exiled and done away with, then there would be some kind of harmony or catharsis that would, I mean, it would be a violent, you could say the ends don't justify the means. But I think people fantasize about that sort of thing. But also,
Mhm.
I think we also kind of recognize that maybe that's not. I mean, some people think it is likely, Tim Pool or something. I think it's unlikely. So I don't know. There are these kind of intuitive, like, the average person. Do they recognize, like, don't you see, by like promoting this runaway process, it's going to lead to the collapse of civilization? I mean, they're not really thinking about it too carefully. But I would also sort of defend that just like go along to get along attitude, because I think that in a lot of senses, moral panics inspire reciprocal moral panics. And so, as much
Yeah.
as the left is freaking out and being hysterical, I think the right also tends to say, well, if you're willing to cancel me for this, then what's next? And then you're pro pedophilia, and then, things go in a crazy direction. So,
But at the same time, I think, to have people speculating and even proposing extremist positions is healthier. Like, it's better that people discuss white supremacist ideas, discuss apocalyptic scenarios, talk about, I don't know, imminent civil war, like speculate about these things, right? Um, Rather than like some people saying, "No, you can't talk about this at all."
sure. Yeah, I would agree with that. And I guess it's a question of, do you think that a discussion of white supremacy is more likely to be had on the right or on the left? And I think that it depends on your perspective. So people on the right would say, no, you can't discuss this because the left has this, hysterical perspective on racism. And if you veer outside of that, then you'll get canceled, and therefore no real discussion can be had. But I think, the left wing position or response to that would be to say that, generally the right wing doesn't, they don't even want to say, it's not that they have a hysterical response, maybe, but they're not even interested. They're not even curious. They're just sort of like, that pro social attitude of like, oh, why are we dredging up slavery? Why are we, let's just move on. It's 2024. We don't need to talk. That's ancient history now. That's the position, or you have a Dinesh D'Souza who's going to say that, the Democrats are the real racists, and they did. And it's like, that's not really an honest way to approach the question. It's a
Mm.
very partisan way to dismiss history.
I think, but in a way, like the problem is politics. Like none of these questions are actually political. Like the fact that everything's become politicized and everything is like a left or right issue. Like this is part of the problem. Like the fact is, in a way, like our entire being is crossed by left and right ideas. Like we're both left and right in ourselves, right? If you want to put it that way, like we're divided subjects. We disagree with ourselves. Like the idea, and I don't know, someone who calls himself a leftist in 2024 would have been characterized completely differently like 50 years ago or whatever, or someone on the right would have been a leftist like 50 years ago or a liberal. So I don't know if it's not really like necessarily helpful. Like I think what's more helpful is, like you're saying, like this deeper approach. Like, okay, so here we are as humanity. These are the issues that confront us within ourselves and collectively and environmentally, as in the world. Let's talk about them, right? And how do we best kind of discuss and adjudicate reality? How do we differentiate between one thing and another? Um, like these are collective discussions, and they're not primarily political. Like
Yes,
politics is a trap.
yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying, but I guess I view politics through the lens of theology, and I think that
Sure.
historically
Yeah.
every state is founded and maintained by religion, and I think that politics has filled our religious vacuum, and that's why, in the same way that everything once was religious, now everything is political, and I don't view that inherently. And now, if you're a Christian, if you're a religious person, you would say we need to banish politics and restore Christianity in its rightful place as the central object around which culture revolves. And I can respectfully disagree with that position, but I think that's an honest position. But I find that a lot of people on the right are not willing to honestly say, like, we don't want we don't want Democrat versus Republican to dominate our society. We want Christian versus non-Christian to dominate our society. I mean, that to me is an honest position. I don't think it's likely to happen. But if someone wants to advocate for that, I can have a what is it called, a good faith discussion with such a person.
Mhm.
But I find oftentimes on the right there's this agnosticism, this ambiguity that says, no, 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 we don't want Christianity to be the center of society. We believe in a multipolar, multi-religious, multicultural, diverse society. We don't want anything at the center. We don't need left versus right. We don't need Christian versus non-Christian. We can just be a liberal democracy without any qualifiers, without any identity. It's just about, utilitarian economics and what's good for the economy, and we can solve all these problems. And I'm like, actually, that is more delusional than leftism, if by your own standards. So I get frustrated with that, and I try to call it out.
Mhm.
And maybe I'm contributing to polarization by saying that, but I just think it's true. And yeah, I don't because I'm not attracted or not convinced that like a Christian resurgence is good or possible. I don't take that position, but it is a position versus just saying, like, oh, I'm so tired of the politicization of society. Can't we just get, like, why is politics infecting everything? It's because something needs to infect everything. Something needs to tie
Sure.
everything together.
I mean, I wasn't necessarily proposing some sort of like Christian, I don't know, theocracy or something, like in a way, maybe the implication more of what I'm saying is like maybe just like small politics, like politics in its place, right? This. I mean, Christianity is complicated, like and you did do a brilliant kind of analysis. I know I take the Schmittian point about politics and theology and so on, and absolutely mappable. And yeah, politics is theology and war by another name, perhaps. But how to put it, like it's sort of putting things in their right place. Like, and I get it, like the founding fathers were trying to do this too, right? Trying to say like the freedom of worship, the freedom of conscience is in a way the most important thing, right? But how do you make room for that? Like, how do you set things up in such a way that that space is kept open, held open, right, for people to worship freely or in the way that they choose, um, without that becoming political or without politics becoming religious. It's probably impossible. Um,
Yeah, that would be my position. Is
yeah.
the founding. I mean, I think actually, and this is again an uncomfortable thing that I think the left is willing to say, is that white supremacy was the glue that held American culture together from its founding up until, again, probably the 1920s. And when we started to undermine white supremacy, we had to try to come up with a new glue. And that, some people call it leftism, some people call it liberalism, whatever that is. I mean, that's been figuring itself out. That's been trying to codify, okay, well, what exactly is this glue? What exactly holds us together? Who exactly are we as Americans? I mean, some people have answers that they think are the answers, and those answers will probably change, and those are in flux. And when things are in flux, they're chaotic and they're confusing, and a lot of stuff just doesn't make sense. Like, a lot of the
Mhm.
emphasis, a lot of the discussions we're having that are so impassioned, in 20 years probably will be far past that, and we'll entirely forget a lot of those things. I
So
think as go ahead.
yeah, no, no, but let me ask you, like, I mean, another story we could tell, which I think is equally true, maybe happening at the same time as the one you're telling, is really like the egalitarianism and universalism of Christianity, particularly obviously the Christianity of the New Testament is also liberal, right? Like it's also liberalism. It's also, if everyone is equal before God, this is profoundly anti-racist, right?
I don't disagree at all that leftism derives from Christianity.
Okay.
And again, so my view when I say deep left, I'm saying that there is a form of leftism which is even bigger and broader and precedes Christianity and goes back to Judaism, and then it's Zoroastrian, and then it's, so civilization and
Okay.
religion itself, in my opinion, is a leftist technology. That's a very broad, completely alien idea to most people, but that's how far I take it. I take it to its logical
Okay. That's cool.
conclusion.
That's cool.
And so yeah, I would agree with that. And obviously when we use the term white supremacy and we go back to the history of race and how did obviously medieval Europeans had a very different conception of race, if they had any conception of race at all,
Right.
before Columbus. And so the question of how did the concept of race originate and how did it develop? Christianity was a part of that process, both in terms of creating our conceptions of race, as well as later on deconstructing those conceptions of race and creating, a new conception. And so Christianity has been a part of that conversation and that process on both ends, both creating the concept of white supremacy and then later deconstructing and opposing that. And now that Christianity is still going through this process of unraveling, devolving, degrading, whatever you want to call it, it is still part of that process in its children, as we refer to, liberalism and leftism is
Mhm.
a secularized version of the Christian ethos. So when I ask people,
Yeah.
okay, you believe in human rights, where did that come from? Most people are not, they're either not willing to even try to answer that question, or
Mhm.
they're gonna give you an answer like, and I find this a lot with like atheists and effective altruists and stuff, and I'm like, well, why do you believe in it? Why do you care about helping the average person, or why are
Mhm.
you a utilitarian? Or and they'll say, well, it's just common sense, it's just moral intuition, it's just good to help people. Like, what are you, a sociopath? And it's like, well, I mean, I understand that maybe there is
Some of them are
some,
actually.
what's that?
Some of them are. Some of the effective altruists are bona fide sociopaths. They're very high IQ sociopaths.
High functioning. Yeah,
Yeah.
I won't accuse them of that, but they certainly, I mean, say that to me when I
And
say
they
like,
admit it. They admit it. They're proud of it.
oh, yeah,
Honestly.
yeah, okay. I'm gonna be soft on them. I'm gonna be gentle with them, but I am gonna say that I've been, I discuss things with some of those individuals, and they've said like, oh, you don't believe that everybody is, and I whatever the particulars are of like, you don't think that humans have a net inherent positive value in the abstract sense, to the point where you don't want like a trillion people living in poverty versus, a billion people living in wealth and those sorts of things. And I say, you're assuming a lot about our moral intuitions that doesn't map to historical reality. So like throughout history, people have treated each other very cruelly. We go to Sparta, we go to whatever period of
Mhm.
history, and we find that like these supposed moral intuitions that are just so blatantly obvious that no one could ever deny them. Well, I don't know, like all of human history disagrees with you, so I'm not
Yeah.
actually sure that's true. And I think we need to give credit to Christianity as actually formulating, Joseph Bronsky's an interesting guy who's a Christian. He's also a lot of other things that maybe contradict that. And kind of when he was asked, like, why are you a Christian? His response was like, well, Christianity is just so weird and so unusual and so contradictory to our selfish desires that it must come from God, because there's no
Exactly.
way that humans could have come up with this thing. And,
Yeah.
people can disagree with that argument, like, but I think there's something true there, which is that, like, a lot of Christianity is not actually intuitive. It's not something you would just,
Mhm.
make up in your basement or something if you're a selfish person. It does seem to be this thing that comes from on high, that comes from outside of ourselves, from some divine realm, and imposes
Mhm.
itself on reality. And I think that's a quality of leftism, is that there is this alien quality to it. There is this otherworldly quality where I'm just going about
Mhm.
my business, living life as a biological human. I'm Adam in the Garden of Eden. And then all of a sudden there's this expulsion. And then all of a sudden there are these rules. And then all of a sudden there's this religion that imposes itself on me. And it's like, where did this thing come from? It must have come from God. And so I take a lot of that metaphorically, to refer to social
Mhm.
processes and civilization and religion. And we could get into a whole topic about psychedelics and the origins of consciousness. And I mean, we could go so many different directions. But I want to respect your time because I know it's quite late for you. And so I think we've covered a lot of ground already, and I'm very happy with this conversation. I want to, as we're coming to an end here, I want to give you the floor, for last words, and tell us, things you're working on, and what you would suggest people go check out and read.
Okay. Well, I'm very intrigued by your deep leftist hypothesis. I think I sort of understand it a bit more, like this kind of very foundational, like the formation of civilization itself, like as a kind of social technology. That's quite interesting to me. I guess just to add on the Christianity front, like one of the major innovations is the becoming symbolic of sacrifice, I guess. That we don't actually have to sacrifice each other or like you know what I mean? Like once we can abstract the idea of sacrifice away from like its literal kind of animistic quality, like we do like go into a different realm, I think, the realm of the symbolic and obviously Christ's sacrifice. It I don't know, like the sort of profundity of that in the sense of saying to everyone else, like Christ dies for your sins, right? Yes, you are tainted by sin, but you're also forgivable, right? And you're also not perfect. And I think this kind of problem with perfectionism, and you referred to it earlier, like this desire to be the best at X or the best Puritan, the best, I don't know, social justice person, the best whatever, or the one that clings the hardest, that is the most dogmatic, the most orthodox, the most scrupulous, and I think scrupulosity is a big um temptation and tendency in humanity, to ritualize in a very formal, obsessive way, like a kind of religious OCD, like because yeah, it's a big problem, and how do we kind of stop these mechanisms from like taking over? And humor and all these things are like hopefully do that, but they're sort of like not really winning the war. Not that humor can ever win a war. Actually, well, humor can maybe stop a war. Uh, and yeah, I don't know. So what am I working on? I'm trying to. I've just been teaching iconoclasm, very related to what we're talking about. These tendencies within religion and also in politics. I'm looking at the French Revolution and Chinese, the sort of Mao's China, and obviously before that, looking at the icon struggle and the within Christianity. Um, and I'm teaching a course on nature, which starts this Friday in London in person. And I have a Substack, and everything is on the Substack, and that's where I write at the moment. And I'm writing for a few magazines like The Critic and Spectator, and like whoever will like send me a book and pay me a small amount of money to review it. But yeah, that's it, I think.
Awesome. Okay, well, we'll look forward to, checking. My audience can go check out your stuff, and links will be in the description. But yeah, it was a very interesting conversation. I'm glad we could, achieve some understanding through this introduction, and
Yeah,
hopefully, at some point in the future, have a follow up and explore some other things about, this relationship between humanity and nature, and
yeah.
what is a natural human? What does it mean to be living a natural life? So
Do,
Very, very excited for that. Yes, you've got your nature right there. So yeah, I'm delighted by this, and I really hope we can have another conversation in the future
yes,
soon.
let's talk again. I have lots of free time now.
Yeah, other
I'm
than the time difference, I'm kind of a, what is it? The opposite of an early bird. I'm a night owl, so we'll have to work around that. But otherwise, yeah, definitely look forward to speaking to you again. This was great, and I'll let you get to sleep. But I really appreciate you coming on.
Oh, thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. Okay, take care, Nina, and we'll talk to you
Bye.
again soon. Bye bye. All right. That's it, guys. You gotta comment, you gotta like, you gotta restack. You know the deal. Share it on Twitter. Thanks for checking in. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye bye.